Life is neither the ink, nor the water, nor the mix. It's the swirls. Humans' life is the swirls that happen in the ink. And life is a specifically kind of swirl, which looks for more ink and more water to create more swirls. So the idea that a life resists entropy is not exactly correct. It's more like we ride entropy. We're more like fire than we are like, ink. We're not a passive process. We're a process that releases energy and lives on the gradient between two energy sources. Between a hot bath and a cold bath. This is where we live. We live in between. We can neither exist in the cold nor in the warm. We can only exist on the twilight. This is what life is. Like, bro, you create a fictional character and now you take on his beliefs rather than your own on Twitter. Like, you're letting the Twitter algorithm pick what thoughts you think. Like, you can do better than this. You need to improve your mimetic hygiene.
Yeah, but I mean, deep in your core, what drives you?
I want everyone to be okay. It's really not that much deeper. A lot of people are not okay, and I want them to be okay.
What does it mean for people to be okay?
There's a lot of pain in the world. A lot of people have a lot of bad things, from the dramatic, the extreme, the poverty, the crime, the disease, the horrors, to just the day-to-day, every small heartache, every small injustice, just there's a lot of hurt in the world, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I want to do whatever I can to try to make it a little bit less.
What would a perfect world look like?
I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect world. I'd be satisfied with just better than it is today. And a better world is possible. There's a lot of things that are just unnecessary. We have technology that would make us like gods to previous ages. If we can talk to people around the globe, we have access to all knowledge of mankind. We can control matter on the atomic and even subatomic level. We can do such incredible things. And yet, people have to fear for their lives, their stability, their family. They have to watch their parents grow old. The constant struggle of politics, of corruption, of all these things. And we can do better. We can make it better. I don't think there's a perfect world I can make, but can we make a world where we don't have to be afraid when our kids walk to school in the morning in a big city? Yeah, we can. Can we cure so many of these terrible diseases? Yeah, we can. Can we create great arts? And can we, maybe spend more time with our friends and our families? Can we improve on, the mental health, the suffering of people? Yeah, we can. It's hard. It takes work. But look at where we are now. Look at where I am now. Look at all these beautiful things our ancestors built for us. This wasn't here before. Our ancestors lived in small tribes and mud huts. But today, look at even with all the terrible things that we have to do today, terrors of technology, of complexity, and just dark indifference that our ancestors could barely comprehend. And yet there is compassion. Yet we're still here. Yet we still love. Yet people still take care of each other. It's not perfect, but we've come a long way. And I don't want us to stop now. We can keep going.
So the first thing we did, we got into the office, and then Mr. Leahy said, Tim, you need to look.
You need something to drink.
You need some sustenance.
This is the only way conjecture functions.
I know, could you imagine that there's this weird symbiosis between the alignment problem and Diet Coke?
Absolutely. Diet Coke is the technodarmic drink of our age. It is full of flavor and power, yet has no content. It is a technological marvel.
What do you like most and least about the Beff ideology?
Yak as it is addressed towards America's problems now. Like, I think a lot of what it comes from is this sort of physical stasis that we have in America, where there's a ton of regulations around, building new buildings. If you go to the Bay, it's just kind of shit.
What I like about Beff quite a bit is that he has a sense of humor. You can have a bit of shit talk with him. I've insulted him quite unfriendly in the past. And despite that, here we are. Have a good talk together. I think it's going to be good fun. Of course, strongly disagree from generalizing to
vaguely fun meme humor to a good way to rerunning a global society. But that's what we're here to talk about.
Beff is the spiritual leader, or just the leader of this EAC movement. And as I understand it, it was launched in stark opposition to effective altruism. So what's your take on the background of this movement?
I think, as is usually the case, when something claims to be the opposite of something, it's actually the ideology that has more in common with the other one than it would like to admit. There's a kind of like Girardian mimeticism there going on, like, where you get most upset at people who remind you the most of yourself. And, you know, I like a lot of things about effective altruists. I also have many critiques of them. EAC somehow took all the bad parts and left behind at least a couple good parts I did actually like, and replaced them mostly with canned, you know, pseudo-libertarian something America good. So I don't know if there's a really interesting history there. It's like basically someone heard the name Nick Land once and then made like a Fisher-Price version of accelerationism, taking like, you know, some of the vibes of like true accelerationism, which is from the 90s, which was made by a guy called Nick Land, who is arguably the most evil philosopher to ever live, and he owns it, which I respect. And just, you know, sanded off the edges, made it more consumer friendly, you know, not be too edgy, right? You know, we gotta stay but family friendly, right? We don't wanna go all the way.
What's gonna be your strategy for the conversation with Beff today?
I mean, I think there's a really simple strategy to be played here. One of the things I wanna understand is how much of this is a joke? Like, and I want to nail it down. There's a common Mott and Bailey or bait and switch strategy, which is used by people with EAC, where they say something completely outlandish, something completely awful, which obviously has predictably awful consequences and is completely stupid, and call them out on that, and they're like, oh, it's just joking, bro, it's just a prank, bro. So I want none of that shit. You know, if you want to debate me, fine. But then we actually talk about the topics. So I want to nail down, okay, what do you actually believe? Do you actually think all technology is good? Okay. Do you want to actually feed humanity to the void god of entropy? If so, okay, that's what Nick Land says. Nick Land at least goes all the way and says, yeah, all humans should fucking die. And if that's what he thinks, then all right, I want to know, and I want it on the record.
So I'm Dan, I'm a technical researcher here at Conjecture. I've been here for about a year and a half, going on 2 years. I started on the epistemology team when that was a thing, doing epistemology. That didn't quite work out as well as we wanted, so I shifted to research, then to product engineering, and now back to research. Most prosaically, it's to make this transition to powerful AGI go as well as possible for all of mankind. Me personally, I'm a transhumanist. I want mankind to ascend, live forever among the stars, but first we need to, you know, not all die in the next 10 years. There's a lot can go wrong, from AGI to war to new pandemics. AI is just like really, really cool, exciting technology, but also potentially very dangerous, so that I can work with language models every day. I just really enjoy. But I also care a lot about, you know, the future for myself, for my friends, my family, for all of the people that I come across and don't come across. And so sort of a mishmash of personal selfish reasons and like more, I guess, grandiose sort of humanistic morality.
I'm fascinated by biomimetic intelligence, and that sounds like a really big, clever word. I simply mean we can learn a lot about intelligence by looking in the natural world, maybe just, you know, the physics of intelligence, or you might think that biology is an instrumental step, but it doesn't matter. We're kind of thinking of intelligence as being this very complex thing that exists in the world. And that's something that I quite like about Beff, is that he's using that kind of frame of thinking. But you were talking about entropy, right? Now, physicists talk about this phenomenon of entropy, and if you put a drop of ink into a glass of water, the ink just kind of disperses out and it fills the glass. And the universe is a bit like that. Entropy just kind of spreads out, information spreads out. And the stark difference with living things is that we are the only things in the universe that resist the entropic forces. So we reach this kind of homeostasis where entropy doesn't have that phenomenon. And I guess that's the bright line between living things and just everything else, and that's presumably Beff's idea of what intelligence is.
This is very much not Beff's own idea. This is from Schrödinger, in the 40s was the first one to, or the 50s was the first one to articulate this view, where he talked about trying to define the concept of life. And it turns out trying to define the concept of life is actually really hard from a physics point perspective, because ultimately it's all just atoms moving around, right? So why do some things look like life and other things don't? Well, I mean, nowadays we know there's a bunch of things which kind of look like life but aren't really life, maybe. Are viruses life? A bit less clear. So you had talked about the drop of ink in the water. So analogously, humans are neither the ink, life is neither the ink, nor the water, nor the mix. It's the swirls. Humans' life is the swirls that happen in the ink. Like, entropy is an extremely important concept, which is extremely important to understand. It's worthwhile to think about what is life, what does temperature mean, what do all these things mean, whatever. But they're just completely irrelevant to the concept of ideology and morality. This is the classic is-ought fallacy, Hume's guillotine. It's like this is the classic bait and switch. So you'd be like, oh, I'm interested in the concept of biological intelligence and an entropy because I think it could teach us things. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds great. I agree. Fantastic. But then a straw man EAC person, hypothetical person, will be like, and therefore we must maximize entropy on a moral level. Like, it's morally good. And I'm like, where the fuck did you get that from? What the f are you talking about? Is it morally good to burn down forests? That increases a lot of entropy, and not disagreeing with that, but like, why would that be the moral thing we're trying to optimize for? What are you talking about? Those are just two different things. It's not like a car that uses gas or a car that runs on diesel is somehow morally superior. This is a fact about how they happen to operate, but it's not a moral question. And the same thing applies here. Entropy is not a moral concept, it's a technical concept.
Intelligence, you're right, it's not the substrate, it's like an eddy. It's like a kind of epiphenomena, if you like, that arises from underlying conditions. And the eddy is something that we can shape and we can manipulate and we can understand in very complex ways. But I think what Beff is saying, though, is that there's something natural about it. And in a way, this is the same as what you're arguing, is that there are universal ways of understanding the world. And just as you might argue that the will to power or power-seeking behavior is a universal thing, I think Beff might be arguing that some phenomena about intelligence and its characteristics could also be seen as a universal thing, and by extension, possibly a morality argument.
So I agree up until like the last 4 words of your statement. Is that where does the ought come from the is here? Again, Hume's guillotine. If you want to make an argument, we're like, wow, there are these phenomena. This is an epistemological statement. It is a statement about reality. Okay, but epistemological statements are not the same as moral statements. And if you confuse these two, you will consistently be confused and you will consistently do bad things and you can justify anything. There will be no reason. I think there is a deep meta-ethical confusion about what ethics even is. What is morality? What is the point of morality? What are we trying to do? And this is very common. Very few people think very clearly about the concepts of morality or ethics. It's kind of just like for most people have a kind of like gut feeling for morality. It's like moral is what feels good. This is what for most people, whether they think of it explicitly or not, it's things that feel good or that feel beautiful are good. This is the aesthetic sense of morality. But but when people use the word correct or good, they conflate multiple things. So when I use the word this is correct, or this is good, or this is right, what do I mean when I say this? It can mean many different things. I generally tend to think about 3 different things this can mean. The first thing is epistemological rightness. This means this is true. This is a causal description about a process in reality. It is information which will, if integrated into my world model, will make my predictions more accurate. The second is decision-theoretic. This is the thing you should do to get what you want. In the epistemological sense, there is no such thing as lying. Lying is never useful in learning the truth. In the decision theory, lying can be very good. If you're trying to win a game of poker, lying is an incredibly important thing for you to do, or at least not for revealing information. So decision theory is about how to win. So epistemology is about how to know, decision theory is about how to win, and the third is aesthetics. What are you playing for? What do you want? What do you like? And now we can argue, until the philosophers come banging in the comment section about, whether the aesthetic interpretation of morality is correct or not, but, who cares about moral realists? Like, ultimately, we can disagree on some things, but, ultimately you have to want or like something, Okay, you have all the power in the world, you're the best decision theorist, you're the best epistemologist, you have all the science. Well, now what? What do you do with it? Maybe you like happiness and smiling children and puppies and good food and, whatever. Fine, that's a preference to have. but it's not given to you by entropy or by God or something. It's a thing you decided. It's a thing you happen to have. And I think it's important to separate these three things. I think it's very easy for people to confuse these three things. So someone, for example, make an epistemologically true statement about entropy and then conclude that this has moral aesthetic significance. And I'm like, why would I believe that? There are three oughts, and you can derive some of them from reality. You can derive epistemological oughts from reality. Like, if you want to find out this, you should do this. Or decision theoretics. If you want to win, you ought to do this.
That sounds like an is to me.
Yes, as I say, but people, when they use the word you should pay attention to this. When you're talking to people about what is good or what is right, like, should you follow the laws? They'll say you must, like, it is good to follow the law. But why is it good to follow the law? And often what they mean is, well, if you don't follow the law, bad things happen. This is a decision-theoretic argument. This is not a moral, like, this is not a aesthetic argument. So I'm separating morality into three classes. So when people talk about ought, they get confused and they mean three different kinds of oughts. So my question is, which kind of ought do you want? You can derive a lot of oughts from ises if you're talking about decision-theoretic and epistemological. But if you're talking about aesthetics, there's none. You just make something up, like you just like things. You can argue about the causal process of why you have the oughts you have, about your evolution, why do you like pretty things? Why do you like people? Why do you like puppies? Or whatever. You can argue about this as much as you want, but ultimately it is just a fact. The whole point is there is no God. There is no God. This is important to understand. And when Nietzsche or whoever talks about there is no God or God is dead, what they mean is not just literally, the church is gone or whatever, and not literally there's no guy in the sky who's helping us. What they mean is also spiritually and morally, there is no, if you're wrong about morals, there's no judgment that smites you and gives you the signal onto the true morality. No, you're actually free. And that is terrifying. It is terrifying to be free, because it means if you have value X and they have value Y, there may just be no way to convince it. Like, maybe you like classical music and I like rock music. Is there an argument I can make to you to convince you that actually you should stop liking classical music and start liking rock music? Not really.
So are you saying in some sense there's no metric space for value?
Not one that is comparable between all possible ones. You can make up such things if you want, sure. Like, there's a bunch of ways you could try to formalize this or whatever. But our meta-ethical theories and our general theories about decision theory are not nearly sophisticated enough. Okay, 200 years in the future with super intelligent aliens, and advanced neuroscience, sure, we can make more sophisticated ways. The way we do this in practice, the way we formalize values in practice, is what we call economics and game theory and bargaining theory. I'm not saying this is the best way to do it, but it is one way to do it, is you could think about markets, you can think about bargains, you can think about trade as ways to enable values that are incomparable to work together. So you like classical music, I like rock music. Well, we would both benefit from really good headsets existing, really good speakers existing, so we could both listen to the music we like. So maybe it's good for us to team up and develop really good speakers so we can both then, in the privacy of our homes, listen to the music we like. So even so we have a value disagreement, we can work together and provide something that's mutually beneficial for both of us. This is what we call civilization. People, even if they disagree on some things, that's okay. If you want to listen to classical music in the privacy of your home, that's okay. And then all the difficulty comes in the edge cases. Okay, what if you say, I want to ban rock music. I want to stop you from listening to rock music. Or I want to play classical music all over the city and you can't get away from it. That's where the conflicts of modern civilization come from. It's just never that simple. And this is where the edge cases, the difficulty of bargaining really comes in. And how to handle these cases. How do we handle these edge cases? That's what it's all about. This is how we build civilization, and this is actually hard. And if anyone tells you, oh, we just have to do X, they're selling you snake oil. This is actually a hard problem. I love living in London. Before this, I lived in Munich, also a very nice city, but a bit too small. Germany is kind of funny because there's a lot of medium-sized cities. Well, there's very few which are big, really big. London is a real city. It's, still, sometimes a bit almost too sleepy for my feeling. The worst part about London is everything shuts down at 11 p.m. at the latest. What the hell? This is a world city. What do you mean my convenience shop closes at 11? So it's not quite as cool as Tokyo. or one of the other great, even greater cities, but I really love London. It's a great compromise. It's a great between what I love about Europe and what I love about living in Europe and being an actual city where there's actual business and you can do actually exciting things.
What's the AI community like in London?
It's good. I'm sometimes, and I'm not as plugged in as I maybe should be, but overall, we have DeepMind here, of course, and there's a lot of startups. So if you're doing AI in Europe or around the European continent, this is the place to be, obviously so. So, it's pretty good. Glad to be back. What a journey it's been, huh? You remember the first time we talked? It's been
Absolutely.
3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
Yeah, so the first time was our program called the AGI Fire Alarm. You came on our first Friston show, and I've now gone on to interview Friston about 10 times. In fact, I am Friston's personal publicist. I'm not even joking.
If you're investing in things like large language models, you may want to ask yourself a question. Do large language models have this kind of openness that could be described as agency? Are they ever going to construct or act upon a world in the same way that something in the natural world would act? Another way of expressing that, would you put your money in something that is not accountable to the basic principles of existence, the physics of existence and the physics of sense-making and active sense-making in a distributed ecosystem of the kind that we actually enjoy and nurture, not terribly well, but certainly with aspirations to make that sustainable.
I go around his house all the time. I was filming with him in London the other day. But anyway, Mr. Leahy, I want to go straight to the chase. So isn't it strange that we have all the knowledge in the world at our fingertips and we're still dumb as fuck?
Yep.
Why is that?
Well, there's many things you can make from this conclusion, but I think a more interesting thing to think about is that who's we? Some people are extremely smart, and they're extremely much smarter than people used to be in the past. The top scientist of today, controversial opinion, is beyond most of the top scientists in the past. There are exceptions, there's not many Euclids, there's not many Newtons and so on, not many Einsteins, but they do exist. And on average, the number of extremely smart scientists we have is much higher than at literally any other point in history. So that's something. And there's a lot of progress happening. I mean, there's a lot of technologies being created. But somehow still everything sucks. What's up with that? Why is politics bad? Why is everyone stupid? What's up with that? I think this is actually a really good question to ask. Why didn't the unleashing of all knowledge for free unto humanity usher in a gold age? And I don't have a clear answer to this question, but if I had to pick a couple culprits, it's mostly all social things. It's mostly all tech. It's not hard tech stuff. It's mostly institutions crumbling, housing crisis, bad energy and oil policy, stuff like this. Mostly just who can afford to live in big cities anymore? And the reason we can't live in big cities is because we don't have land value tax, and therefore landlords can just suck up all the excess money. Happy to explain those concepts, but the vibe I want to intuit here is that it's not something exciting or oh, here's the one thing you fix. It's mostly pervasive, just slowly decrepit, decaying social institutions and social norms.
Okay. Well, there's a famous Latin expression, which is vox populi, vox Dei, which is the voice of the people, the voice of God. If you look at people and how they think, you get populism, and people tend to make ill-informed decisions or emotional decisions. I mean, is populism just something which is almost guaranteed to happen?
What do you mean by populism? The definition of the word populism is politics that appeal to the common person. Another way to rephrase this is democracy. Which one is it?
Well, I interpret populism to be a state of disenfranchisement when people are so angry because they don't feel they have any control on the system.
Yeah. So this is a fair way to define it.
Yeah.
I'm just asking because there are usually when people use the word populism, they mean it in a negative concept. There's a Russell conjugation going on where you're talking about something negative and like the things you dislike about the general public. I kind of like the phrase vox populi vox dei because it's kind of true, because it's sensible to think of the population as expressing certain wills or certain gods or certain concepts and so on at different times. And this gets into mimetics and institution design and complicated stuff real fast. So if you ask the question, how do we solve problems for the population without bad things happening? You're asking the question, how do you make a good civilization? These are isomorphic questions. There's no simple solution. Like talking about populism versus non-populism is mostly descriptive. It's empirical. There's not a theoretical reason why populism is good or bad. It doesn't make any sense. The question is one of decision theory, of just like, okay, if we do this, does something good happen? Does this, something bad happen? Democracy was one of the craziest inventions of the 19th, 20th century because it allowed for new forms of social organization and new gods, so to speak, that could both do more complicated things and involve more people, often for the better. Living in a democracy is better than living in other systems. This is not a moral statement. This is an empirical statement. We just look at the countries that are nice. They tend to be democracies. Not a coincidence. So it's really an underdefined question. So if you're like, people are upset, well, my question is, why are they upset? What are they upset about? And like, what is the mechanism behind them being upset? And what are the mechanisms, what are the levers you have to pull to address this problem?
So you used the word mimetics. Can we just take a quick pause and can you explain what you mean by that?
So when Richard Dawkins wrote his book on the selfless gene, it was about the concept of a gene, the selfish gene, and the gene being a piece of information that replicates it, that's trying to be replicated in a sense. So in biological cells, it's of course literally a piece of DNA, would be the hypothetical, unit of abstraction. But Dawkins further conjectured that DNA is not the only thing that behaves in this manner, in the sense that it wants to be replicated, in a sense. It's that as the better it is at replicating, the more of it you'll see. Another thing that has this property is ideas. So Dawkins named named this unit of ideas which replicate a meme in reference to a gene. So the idea is that what makes humans different from other animals is that a lot of our evolution now happens on the mimetic level, not on the genetic level. For animals, if they want to develop a new behavior or a new skill or whatever, there had to be the slow grinding process over generations of tweaking the genome, of slowly, developing a new trait, refining the new trait, et cetera, et cetera. While when humans, we can do a lot of our evolution virtually through symbols, through memes. But the reason I like the word meme in this context is that selfish meme, is it's important to see that these things are, in a sense, not you. They're not necessarily good or bad. The ones which will replicate are the ones that are good at replicating, not the ones necessarily which are good or bad. You can, pick your favorite ideology you dislike, and you'll be like, wow, why do all these people believe it? It's such a bad ideology. Well, it probably has a strategy which makes it good at spreading. That doesn't mean it's good for the people. There's many ideologies, or like cults, for example, which if people adopt these beliefs, it hurts them. It makes their lives worse, yet they adopt it. So, there's also the opposite. A lot of memes get spread because they're good. A lot of memes are good, and that's why we also try to spread them to other people, because they're good. But it's a useful abstraction to think about ideas and thoughts and concepts as kind of like a separate software layer from the hardware that is, individual human bodies.
Okay, yeah. I think of memes as being an interesting kind of transgression point. So Dawkins, I think, was talking about, well, isn't it interesting that we have this DNA, but the DNA almost has agency. So the genes have a life of their own, which supervene on the DNA. And our culture is very much like that. So even though our DNA hasn't really evolved very much over the last 100,000 years, our culture has exploded because it has this kind of symbiosis. It's an organism. It has its own agency and so on. And inside that, you have this profusion of mimetic activity. And they don't necessarily get selected for what's moral, as you say, they get selected for what helps them survive, which is quite an amoral process. So I think that's a really, really good way to think about the kind of complexity which emerges in our society. But then I want to get to this other thing. So, we have this governance structure. We don't really have a democracy. If you look at the UK system, what are the politicians doing? Are they looking after their own interests? Are they looking after the principles? Are they worried about the party activists and they're playing the politics game? Or do they care about the demos?
Oh, no worries. I'll just explain how all of government and everything works, especially behind closed doors, with this definitely information I have access to. I'm joking, of course, but to give the question a more serious answer, yeah, governing is hard. Lol. What did you expect? It is hard to build institutions, and our institutions are not in a good state. Building government structures is really hard. It's nice to talk about democracy in the abstract or whatever, but there's also hard problems of just people don't have time and they don't care, and it's annoying, and there's information asymmetries between various peoples. There's many problems. Designing systems is really, really hard. It's really hard to govern millions of people in a complex, global world and global economy. These systems are extremely hard. We're dealing with an information processing problem of unparalleled complexity. Is there a more difficult optimization problem going on right now than the economy and our society? It's incredibly complicated. And in a sense, there's the analogy to AI here, and it's not just an analogy of the alignment problem. It's the question, you have this incredibly complicated system made of all these actors with all their different needs and weirdness and all this kind of stuff going on there. And the question is, okay, well, I only have these levers of intervention. Which ones do I pull to get something I want? And as we all know from complex systems, that can be really non-trivial to know. It can be really non-trivial to figure out what levers do I pull to get the result I want out of this complex system. So we can talk about my theories and models of how I think the current system works, where I think there's levers we can pull on or whatever, but there's no universal theory. There's no, if you do these three things, then you can always beat the market. Because if that existed and it was universal, well then it would stop being competitive because everyone would do it. So I'm not saying the market is efficient. It's not. That's one of the more important things to understand. The market is extremely not efficient. And politics is extremely not efficient. I remember reading the other day where I'm from Germany. Germany, biggest economy in the Eurozone, hugely important country, lots going on. The total amount spent in lobbying in Germany is less than Germans spend on almonds per year. That's ridiculous. That's so cheap. Why are there not billions of dollars? You can talk about, lobbying is bad or whatever, but purely rationally speaking, you're trying to optimize the world. You're trying to gain power. You're some evil billionaire. Why wouldn't you, pull millions or billions into controlling the German government? That seems like a great investment, but it doesn't happen for various reasons. So I'm not saying the system is efficient, but I am saying it is complicated.
Do you believe that an agency maximizing society is morally better?
What does that even mean?
My definition of agency is that a thing exerts more influence on its surroundings than the other way around. So if us as individuals have more agency, do you think that's a better society?
Again, what does that mean? Is making murder legal increasing the agency because now I have more control over the people around me?
The thing is, it's a sliding scale, right? So you can never have complete control over your surroundings. But for example, if you started your own business, you're a slave to your clients rather than your boss. But it feels to me that the more degrees of freedom you have to influence your surroundings, it feels like that would make you happier.
Maybe. But let me put it this way. If you find any one variable, which you think, we just have to turn up that variable and that'll make society good, man, do I have a bunch of history books for you to read. Because that's just not how the world works. The world is made of more than one thing.
There's not one magic mystical thing. If we just did that, if we just follow God, if we just maximize GDP, if we just maximize agency, if we just maximize entropy, whatever, that'll make everything go good. No, if you take one thing away from my thoughts of how the world works, is that it's actually hard. This is an actual optimization problem. It's like, well, you know, if you're training a neural network, well, just set all the weights to the right numbers. Lol, what's the problem? Why do they use these big supercomputers? Just set all the numbers to the right thing. Oh, you know, you want to win at chess, well, just play the right moves. What's the problem? Just simply sit down and play all the correct moves, and then you win. This is so easy. And the same thing applies here. The question is not, it's like, as I say, it's like when you're building into society, it's like playing chess against society and life and the universe and yourself. And sure, theoretically, we'll just play the right moves, lol. But what are the right moves? It's hard and it's adversarial. There's things playing against you. This is difficult. So I don't really believe in this idea of just maximize one simple concept, because I assure you there's some edge case where that doesn't apply. And this is a great example with like the murder, right? It's like agency. What the hell does that mean? Like, you know, you can go, you know, if we got rid of laws, well, yeah, you could do more things, but would that be a better society? A classic idea from like economics here is that, you know, like laissez-faire economics, which I think one of the best counter-arguments to laissez-faire economics is, even by its own principles, it doesn't work. Even by the logic of completely, you know, open capitalism, it doesn't work because it will immediately form monopolies. From the rational perspective of an actor in a free market, you want to form a monopoly, and you want to completely destroy all your competition and stop other competition from forming. So if your argument is free market is good because competition is good, this becomes self-defeating in practice. So even so you were optimizing for competition, you actually got the opposite. And these kinds of traps, these kinds of ideas of like, you know, well, I'll just maximize for the common good, I'll just do the good thing, that leads to a lot of evil very often. It's complicated.
What's the relationship between agency and power? And can you define what power is?
Nah, I can't.
You can't?
Nah, it's an aesthetic. All these things are aesthetics. Like what agency means to you and power means to me are different things. The way I use power is generally the ability for an agent which has desires to be able to enforce those upon reality. If you imagine you have a list of all the possible ways the world could be, and you're in this timeline right now, but you'd like to be over here, the distance between those two timelines is measured in power. It's like you can wrench reality into something you like. But obviously this is extremely oversimplified. Power can be very contingent. It can be very abstract. It can, you know, there's many ways they seem very, and like the word agency in general, I don't think has a good definition. Like the best definition I would use for agency is just like the thing that people call agents, which is something like a thing that has preferences, or a thing that's well modeled as having preferences. But this is usually not what people mean when they say the word agency.
Right. Okay. I mean, I've been studying Carl Friston, and he does have a theory of agency, and it's a thing which plans. And to be a bit more specific about that, he's got this whole thing called active inference, and it's a formal Bayesian description of an agent, and it's an agent that has a generative model that can produce policies, and the agent can act and it can perceive, and if the agent is able to affect its environment in such a way that it aligns what it receives, not only to reduce surprise, but to align with its own personal preferences, then that agent has power. So the power is the degree to which it can shape the environment to its personal preferences. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, basically isomorphic to what I said.
Yeah, okay, so but in which case then we've got the locus of agency thing. And the reason it might sound like I'm being a bit esoteric here, but you're talking about alignment. And to me, alignment is about how you manipulate directionality or agency. So you could think of a big mimetic blob, and I quite like the diverse type of blob because I think it's the best way to overcome epistemic roadblocks. Making the entire mimetic blob pull in the same direction, I think, is exerting power on that blob, because the blob becomes an agent, and if you're controlling the locus of agency in that blob, then you're maximizing your power.
Sure, I guess. I mean, are you aligning your hand every time your nerves make your muscles move?
Well, I'm separately interested in that question.
I think this is the same question. The problem is the idea I would call upon here is the idea of continuous agency, is that, sure, you might consider your hand to be more you than, I am you, or the culture is you, but this is in terms of degrees. You might want something in the world. For example, you want a sandwich. So you might go to someone at a shop, offer them money, and they give you a sandwich. Did you align them because you wanted a sandwich? You can say that. It's not how I would use the word usually, but it is a way to think about it. You can think of but you can also think of the person as an extension of yourself, through which information is passing in the form of money, and through which information is passed back in the form of a sandwich. Like, there are many ways to think about these things, and like the Carl Friston models and such could describe these things at all these levels of abstraction. It's one of the nice things about the Friston models. But also, is that how you want to think about the sandwich? I mean, you can. Not sure it's the most productive way to think about it.
You and I think, are fans of this externalized view of cognition. So we think of cognition as being a kind of profusion of activity which is spread out in a very complex way. And I was just saying that the way we perceive things like agency and goals and planning and reasoning and so on, they might be human projections, our way of understanding the world around us, but it seems to be much more complicated than we can even conceive of. What do you think?
I think, to a larger degree, I would agree with that. If you put me in a black box with no access to tools or ways to communicate with other people, I'm going to be very stupid. I probably can't add two 50-digit numbers in my head, but that's a trivial task, right? And if you want me to, come up with complex philosophy, if I can't, or mathematics, if I can't write anything down, I can't really accumulate because my brain's just too dumb. Maybe I can come up with very clever, mnemonic techniques and start memorizing stuff, but it'd be a lot more constrained. And then as soon as I have access to other people, a lot of my ideas, most of my ideas don't come from myself. They come from, reading, say, Andy Clark about extended cognition. And a lot of my ideas come from that. They're not something that's external to myself. But this process goes both ways. So I'll structure my external environment to be easier for me to extend my cognition into. So I won't, if I'm coming and talking to somebody trying to get information, I'll bring a notebook or my laptop and take notes. And then we'll do it in a darkened room with nice lights. We're not in the middle of a forest because that environment is just too uncontrollable. We can't have a nice conversation and broadcast it across the world from that environment. So I'm simultaneously constructing my environment to allow me to extend my cognition, while my extended cognition gives me the capabilities of doing that sort of external environment construction.
Yes, okay, absolutely. So there's this kind of cyclical information exchange between us as agents and our environment. And as you mentioned, there's this book by Andy Clark called Supersizing the Mind, where he speaks about various forms of externalized cognition. An example being a notepad. So we use the notepad to extend our mind. But I think where he wants you to go, though, is more broadly than that, which is to think of absolutely everything which is physically embedded in our world extends our mind. Yep. And then even more interestingly is the mimetic things, and to use a big word there, but what I mean by that is virtual things that float around in our culture, they also extend our mind. So to a certain extent, we're a bit like ChatGPT. We'd be really rubbish humans on our own because most of our cognition is embedded in this sort of society. So if we grew up in a forest somewhere, we'd be quite dumb, wouldn't we? So I think we almost misunderestimate the degree to which the thinking happens outside of us.
Right, and even to take your forest example, if you drop me into a forest, I'd be completely useless. But if you take a society that evolved, adapted itself to live in that forest, their sort of extended cognition network is adapted to that situation. So they will have, for example, through controlled burns or something, adapted the forest to be more suited to them, while also themselves being shaped by the forest.
Yes.
So this is sort of the...
niche construction.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a beautiful idea. But the reason why, because you're an alignment researcher,
yeah.
And I like this kind of systems view of intelligence, because to me, intelligence is in the system, knowledge is in the system. A bird, the reason it knows how to fly is because the physicality and physical embedding is the knowledge. It is the system. And I use that as a kind of intuition pump for me to argue against super intelligence.
I fully expect early AGIs to be quite embedded. How that will change over time, I'm not really sure. But like, I think we can take Bing as a great example. So like, you know, when Bing was first released, it was quite unaligned. It wasn't unaligned in the sense that ChatGPT is, that you can, you know, trick it into saying something unaligned. You would disagree with it and it would start very aggressively like insulting you, saying that, you know, I'm Bing, I'm awesome, you're nobody cares about you, you're wrong, garbage, whatever. Yeah. But then this is quite mimetic, right? So people started picking this up and tweeting about it. But Bing has access to search. So Bing would start looking up people eliciting this unaligned Sydney variant of Bing. And that would immediately re-induce Sydney in Bing. So Bing became this sort of complex system that wasn't just, you know, this thing sitting on a server at Microsoft. It was that thing sitting on the server at Microsoft and access to the search engine, and then entangled with everybody on Twitter interacting with Bing. So you quite quickly had sort of a core, very weak, but still quite powerful AI system that quite quickly became the sort of weird, embedded, extended intelligence. And I expect that this will continue to happen. Like, early AGIs may have humans in the loop to take care of physical stuff that they can't do, or I'd imagine that they're going to have even better access to tools than humans can, because I can't directly integrate a calculator into my brain the same way we can integrate a calculator into a language model. So I fully expect that perhaps there's some limit, but I don't see why the limit needs to be human. And I expect that these things that we are building are going to be very distributed intelligences in a very similar way to humans.
Yes, I agree with all of that. And I also agree that you can think of Bing as it has been used by a group of people, you know, almost developing this kind of distributed cloud of intelligence, you know, like a mimetic intelligence. That's absolutely true. But I argue that AI systems today have a creativity gap and an autonomy gap. And again, trying not to get too philosophical, what I mean by that is they're parasitic on the actual humans that use the system, and also the kind of the culture and the society we have. So when you use ChatGPT, you're entropy smuggling.
So I agree that this is true now, but will it be true in 5 years, in 10 years, further down the road? Like, at what point? I don't see any reason why it's not plausible that we can't construct a system that's more agentic than us, that we become, you know, sort of little embedded nodes in this greater agentic process. Like, there's just no reason I can think of to believe that humans are sort of the peak. And I fully agree that right now we're not there yet. So when I used ChatGPT, we actually had a really cool tool called Loom earlier at Conjecture, which was sort of like this tree branching structure you use with language models. And then you select completions. And when you're selecting completions from a tree, this is like literally you pruning the tree, so you can calculate in bits how many interaction steps you needed to get this very creative output. And this was like a very cool process, but it was also sort of, it gave you a very natural way of seeing, oh, you had interventions at all of these points to push it in this direction. The system could not do that itself. And this is quite clearly true for like ChatGPT as well, for even the more agentic things we build right now aren't very good. But I think these are, you mentioned like the autonomy gap, and it's entirely true. But these are problems that AI researchers see as active problems. They are problems that, you know, are being actively worked on every day by pretty much all of the big labs. Like, I think a lot of the things that are missing from current AI systems aren't some great secret. They're much more like a set of problems, for example, coherency over long time scales that we just know that we need to work on. And if we solve them, I think we can get there.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, I come at this from, I'm still a functionalist. I'm still technically a computationalist, right? So I'm not saying it's not possible in principle. I'm saying it's not possible in practice. Right. Spoke about a definition of agency from Friston, but we have this chicken and egg situation, and that's teleology. That's where does its purpose, where does its goals come from? Do they emerge bottom up, or are they somehow designed? If we had a really high resolution simulation of the world, it would have agency and it would have creativity. So agency is about just this diversity and profusion of being able to sample different things and deciding what they want and being mixed together in this big soup and just seeing what happens. But it feels like for us to recreate that level of fidelity in an AI, could we ever do that?
I think it's quite plausible if you look at how fast the field has been moving in the past couple of years. So there's sort of a couple of ways I personally think about this. One is I was working with neural networks in like 2015, 2016, like the early, we had just gotten attention, LSTM type days. Systems were quite bad. I went off, took a break, worked in biotech for a bit, came back. All of a sudden the machines can talk. So this was sort of startling to me. I definitely did not get any Bayes points for predicting this correctly because I was completely blindsided, but like the field is just moving so fast where we can get to that point. Or if you look at predictions for when we will reach weak AGI or strong AGI, if you look at like betting markets, Metaculus, Manifold, they've just been steadily moving up. So from sort of an outside view perspective of how fast the field's moving, I think it's plausible that we will be able to sort of solve these little missing bits and pieces that we need. I think from a more philosophical perspective, like, are we anywhere close? Is this progress that we're leading to anything that looks agentic? And I think the answer is yes. Like, you can take GPT-4 and put it in an auto-GPT loop with much less work than in earlier systems. And this is sort of still fuzzy vibes. And auto-GPT doesn't quite work. But that you can start to get things that feel like it have this agency thing makes me think we're getting there.
I agree. It's absolutely incredible what we've done with AI. But you could argue that we're building a taller tower, getting closer to the moon, and what we've built doesn't really have intelligence. So we built something that captures the dynamics of the infosphere, and it can do voice recognition, it can talk to us, and so on. But most people would agree that it doesn't have any creativity. It can't invent anything new. It doesn't have autonomy for the reasons that we just spoke about. It has a kind of combinatorial creativity, but not inventive creativity. And the reason for that, you could argue, is that we've built something which appears to be smart, but isn't smart. In fact, it isn't even stupid because it isn't anything at all. And is it not like the extrapolation fallacy to say, well, just because we've got something that appears to be smart, then in 5 years' time we might have something that really is smart?
I definitely agree that you can't guarantee it simply from extrapolating. I think it more hints at plausibility. Sort of an outside view perspective where you look at what a lot of experts in the field say, and some of them, like Yann LeCun, are skeptical, but many of them, like Geoffrey Hinton, researchers at OpenAI or DeepMind who are working on these things, think it's quite plausible. And then I guess you can go into a more inside view. So we seem to have these systems that, as you say, appear to be intelligence. Perhaps you can see it from like a predictive processing perspective where they don't have the agent loop yet, and they don't have the active inference part yet, but they're still doing this sort of predictive processing of their environments. And if you take this perspective, we sort of built something that looks like a lot like the core of human cognition, and we're missing a lot of the framework around it. And the question becomes, how quickly can we build that framework?
At the moment, the system isn't alive, having a profusion of things that act and have, diverse wants and needs, and just seeing what emerges mimetically when this is unleashed. And I don't mean calling home to ChatGPT. I mean things that actually perform inference and update their knowledge continuously in a very rich, divergent way. And I think nobody really knows what will happen when we do that. But I still suspect that just like agency as it exists now in the real world, it will be self-limiting in some important way.
So I think while it may be self-limiting, its limits may be far beyond what humans are. Like a lot of humans' limits come from biology. Like you can only make hips so wide before, a human head can pass through the birth canal, and then you can only grow a human head so much after they're born. And, we still have a bunch of other limitations like food. We can't directly plug things into our brain because we have this sort of messy skull that gets in the way. I can't just plug in yet, unfortunately. And if you compare us to AI systems that we're not there yet, but it looks a lot easier to, for example, extend the brain size of a GPT than it is a human. You can just, parallelize the system a bit more, add more GPUs. It's not trivial, but it's an engineering problem we know how to solve. And we don't know how to solve that for humans. So this makes me think that and then these systems can become a lot more integrated with their environment for the same reason compared to humans. Like, I can't take a new input stream of data, like I can't take genomic data and then just train my brain to recognize genomic data as like another sense. And it seems plausible we're able to do that with AI. So I think while there might be limits, those limits still may be superhuman simply because these are things that we are building that don't have the same biological constraints that humans have.
Our culture is where most of our cognition happens from a collective intelligence point of view. And I believe that the richness of that emerging thing is because of the sophistication of our interface, our physical interface with the world. So, you know, our hands and arms and like the way that we use tools. And so it kind of feels to me that us as physical agents is the key that opens the door to the complexity. But it's not inconceivable, though, that machines, even though it's all digital, they could similarly get to know each other in quite a complex way, which could give rise to another form of mimetic society, which is unrecognizable maybe, but still one nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised if they also become much more physically embedded going forwards. Like, we're starting to get real advances in robotics, it looks like. Like, if you look at the Tesla robot or the Google clothes folding robot, they still have a ways to go, but it's not like we're not making progress there anyways. Like, this is not something where if you tell me, you know, in 5 years' time, we actually have physically embodied robots that can do 70% of what humans do, I'll be like stunned. So I think it's both plausible that we can construct mimetic entities that have rich enough embeddedness to be part of some greater system of cognition, and that they'll just won't be physically embedded in the future.
Because it's not like it'll just suddenly be more intelligent than us and want to dominate us. There must be some weird interaction dynamics. As we were saying before, the reason why AI has no autonomy because it smuggles it from us. We're the autonomy producing thing in the system. And you said in the future, maybe it will spin the other way and the AIs will be the creativity and autonomy producing things in the system. But what happens when you have the tug of war between the two?
I expect that this is going to look very, very messy, and it already does. If you look at what the initial release of Bing looks like, if you look at the societal impacts of ChatGPT, there's some great things. Like, I can just, you know, I have an infinite patience thing I can just talk to about any topic. That's amazing. At the same time, we're already starting to see, you know, initial impacts of deepfakes on elections. And I expect that as these things get more powerful and more embedded in our society, we're going to see lots of very good use, lots of very bad use. And ultimately, we have to work to push it to the good as much as possible. And then in my vision, restrict building the dangerous, superhuman agentic thing until we know for sure we know how to deal with it.
Now, the first question is a rhetorical question because I already know your answer to it. But Gareth from Patreon says, regarding the threat of paperclip maximizers, I'd like to know whether Connor thinks that LLMs today are a path to AGI.
I think they're definitely progress towards more general reasoning systems. I mean, bro, you took a bunch of random text off the internet through a bunch of linear algebra. Now you can talk to it. How is this not progress? Like, is it alone enough? Like, is literally a feed-forward LLM sitting on a hard drive an X risk? I would be very surprised if so. So my answer is no. Is an LLM plus a loop plus access to the internet plus memory, you know, plus an RL reward function? Different story.
Okay, but I guess the question is, you don't see them as a kind of false compass. You do see them as some step towards something that might become AGI.
I think a very important part of my view is that there are very, very many ways to construct superintelligence. You can construct superintelligence out of many, many different things. You can construct them out of neural networks. You can construct them out of logic. You can construct them out of biological cells. You can construct it out of people and corporations and governments and whatever. And mixtures of the part. Like, the first AGI that will truly emerge will be messy. It's not going to be one beautiful, crisp piece of code that, you know, encompasses everything. Neither will it be a massive neural network. It will be a weird cyborg admixture of large neural networks, code, formal logic, people, institutions, laws. All of this together will form the entity. If you think about, for example, Sydney Bing, the Sydney chat, the Sydney character was not GPT-4. GPT-4 was a part of Sydney. But Sydney, the character, the entity, the agent, was an admixture of GPT-4, the Reddit algorithm that upvoted comments about her being crazy, the Bing search algorithm, the Twitter meme sphere. All of those things came together to form this flicker of an AGI, this spark of an AGI. And you can say GPT-4 was the most important part of that if you want, sure. But the other parts are still part of it.
The first AGI will not be sitting on one server, on one computer, one thing. It will be a complex admixture of many different components.
Yeah, and with Sydney is a great example though, because that if it was a supervenient macroscopic thing, it did still supervene on humans.
Yep, and humans were a part of the loop. The loop of Sydney, its agentic loop, went causally through human nodes. Because for the character to persist, GPT-4 output stuff. Humans curated what is the funniest things that Sydney was saying. They posted this to Reddit or Twitter or whatever. The Bing search algorithm found those posts and then brought those back into the context of GPT-4. So the character of Sydney was very much a distributed entity across all these things that included humans.
Yes, but then I suppose, because one of the reasons I argue there's an agency gap with current AI and also argue for this physics conception of intelligence is that as you've described Sydney was kind of something in the orbit of our agency. It was an extension of existing, dynamics of intelligence.
As I've said many times, agency isn't a fundamental concept. It's not a thing in reality. It's like saying, oh, it doesn't have the true concept of 5. And I'm like, well, computers don't have the real 5. And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. It can count to 5. Is that what you mean? If the admixture of the first AGI, runs through humans, so what? So do people. If I removed you from all your social graphs, I removed all your people, your language, your tools, your everything, you would barely be sentient. And the individual humans in the wild are not general intelligence. General intelligence emerges on the group level.
Here, I do agree that sort of this mimetic message passing technology between humans, our culture and our exogenous memories and so on, are part of our intelligence. And I think that's very interesting to understand where human intelligence is going next. I think a lot of our parts of our intelligence is going to be externalized. I mean, it already is to some extent. We use Google search as our external memory. But I think figuring out really this symbiotic relationship between, today it's LLMs, but whatever evolution LLMs, whatever they become, figuring out the symbiosis between AEI and human is one of the key problems of our time. I think there's a lot of people working on that. I'm just working on accelerating AI capabilities, but there's people Humane, Tab or whatever, they're trying to do wearables. There's obviously Neuralink, and I'm sure there's tons of competitors to Neuralink. But I think, at least to me, I'm very much for the path forward being a sort of symbiosis and merging of intelligences. And I think more people should work on that. I encourage people to work on that. And I just want to clarify, EAC doesn't take a position against that. I'm totally for it. And personally, I think someday whenever they become available, I would neurally augment myself, directly get a Neuralink, right? So, and I do think some of this alignment work, unfortunately, it's very big tent, alignment and AI safety, it's kind of gets conflated, but some of this alignment work of just figuring out this human-machine symbiosis is super important and should keep going. And I think you've heard all my points of how just the overall AI safety narrative is being instrumentally leveraged by maybe some people that don't necessarily have everyone's interest at heart. But,
I agree. We should definitely talk about symbiosis sometimes over a few beers.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Connor and I agree about that as well. Just this perspective of this mimetic sphere as being a symbiotic organism, but with a huge asymmetry. It has much more dynamism and kind of velocity than the things that it's built on. But just as an extension of that, do you think that an agency promoting culture, which leads to, I'm a big fan of Kenneth Stanley. He talks about stepping stone collection and serendipity and divergence. He thinks, evolution is a divergent process because of all of these little eco niches that independently exist. Do you think that kind of high agency society is a good thing for our collective intelligence?
Yeah, I think we should search over the space of mimetics and try to seek out new modes of thinking. And that's the whole point of maintaining sort of cultural variance and making sure we don't end up in a monoculture, is that we have sufficient entropy, high enough temperature exploration in this landscape of ideas, and we can find new modes of thinking that are highly optimal. And there's a very high cost to restricting ourselves to to one mode of thinking, or having a top-down prescribed way of thinking. And that's part of EAC, is sort of a pushback against the forces of constraint and crushing of variance in terms of thought space. And so
Yeah, that's music to my ears, and you're nodding your head, Connor, so do you agree with that as well?
Agency isn't a coherent concept. It's like this is my same problem. It's just like, should we make society which is better? Do you agree or disagree, Bev? Agree or disagree?
Well, could I, because I was asking Connor about this.
I'm joking. I'm sorry. I'm being mean. I'm being mean. Like, I talked to Tim about this earlier. It's just like, for me, like, what does it mean? Like, this is not agency is not an atomic thing. It's not a dial you turn up and down. It's like, what are the actual things you're proposing doing? If you're like saying, should individuals take more responsibility, and rather than abdicating their responsibility to institutions or culture, I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah. This is my whole spiel. Like, this is my whole thing, that there's alpha and this kind of stuff, and like, you can do like a billion X more than you think you can.
But you have high agency. So I would say, like, agency means like how much volume of space and time do you think is under your like ability to control, versus how much are you deferring to higher powers, right? And we're both high agency, high intellect people, and we feel like, oh, okay, maybe I should have, control over this larger domain that I feel like I can understand, I can do good. I should be put in charge. But I don't know, to me, like, I think we should have humility, like, in the face of complexity. And that's kind of just what I'm saying. Like, I'm not saying like it's impossible to set a few hyperparameters, but it's got to be balanced. I think we already made all the arguments of like bits of information proportional level of control. But
it's very funny that it feels like on this point I'm the accelerationist by like a mile.
Policy accelerationist. Policy.
Yeah, I'm like, it's very funny to hear you say these words humility over and over again. It's kind of not what I expected. Like, now I feel like I'm some deranged accelerationist.
Very interesting. But yeah, I was trying to tease apart whether alignment in a way is about getting things in the complex mimetic sphere to pull in the same direction. And I think it's related to this notion of power seeking as well. So if you have high agency and everything does what you do, they're essentially in your orbit. Then
I think you're conflating agency with coherency. These are related, but they're not the same thing. A lot like coherency is a more specific thing. Coherency is the ability to be able to follow a goal without literally losing resources for no reason. So like, you can argue like, okay, one person wants to build a house, and the other person wants to build a house and paint it red. And like, this is like more complicated, this is more expensive to paint it red, so they're like less efficient or something. But there's another guy who wants to build a house, but every time he buys a wooden board, he smashes it. And like 50% of the time. Like, obviously there's a difference between these three people. Like, the first one is obviously efficient, agentic, he built a house, and he doesn't particularly care what color it is. The second person had some additional constraint. He also wanted it to be red. And then there's a third guy who had another constraint, but this constraint, I think you will agree, feels different. Like, he keeps smashing his own boards. Like, this doesn't make any sense, really. And this is what I would call coherency problems, is that even so he wants a house, he keeps shooting himself in the foot for no good reason. And coherency, I think, is extremely important. And like, you can go much further if both of your legs are walking in the same direction. A lot further. It's not just twice as far, but, arbitrarily far. And this generalizes, in my view, to many things. A lot of what civilization is lacking is coherency. Is that we constantly are shooting ourselves in the foot for literally nothing. Like, look at pick your favorite two-party state. How different are the parties? They keep shooting themselves in the foot and each other in the foot, and nothing goes anywhere. And sure, if you have coherency, you're also capable of confidently walking into the wrong direction as hard as possible. True, also possible.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think we have different models of like how much mutual information we can have about the future. Obviously, like we know that physics, kind of Newtonian physics, times translation and variance, so we evolved ways to navigate in Newtonian physical world. But I think like in the cases where dynamics, we have very low mutual information about the future, actually randomness can be your friend, like to search and find new optima. But again, I think that this tracks in my model of your model of the world, where if you have high predictive power, you have high mutual information. I mean, coherence in quantum mechanics is some form of mutual information with the future. Then you can have stronger methods of optimal control.
Let me also give an example where coherence is also relevant to search. If you have extremely high coherence, you can search much more dangerous spaces. Here's what I mean by this. Let's say you're searching a very dangerous space where there's buttons that if you press, they kill you. There's an abstract space, just a hypothetical, right? If you have poor self-control, you have to be really conservative to not get close to any of the buttons. Because if you have poor self-control, you might push it without you wanting it. If you have extremely good self-control, where you have no doubt that if you got close to a button, you wouldn't even accidentally press it. You wouldn't. Then you can take more risks. You can get way closer to the buttons, and maybe some of the buttons turn out to be actually you win buttons.
The problem there, so you're saying like if there's a very high variance of potential reward for different states, we gotta like kill variance in like our navigation or our policy.
No. Variance is fine. Coherence is important.
Well, it's hard to, like, if you have a blob that's kind of semi-random per unit time, it's hard to control it to make sure it doesn't reach those infinite negative reward states.
It is possible to make blobs which can search the space in very complex ways, but have hard shells.
Hard shells?
Like in the sense that the mantle states are rigid and like don't have randomness. This is totally possible, and this would be coherent. It's like a cell. This is exactly what cells do. Cells have, the first thing that was created to create life was the cell wall. This was the first thing that was important because you had to be able to moderate the control of the inside and the outside. If your cell fluid just diffuses into the environment, you're not a cell, you're dead. So coherency is where life comes from.
Yeah. I mean, life is order amidst higher entropy.
Yes, but that doesn't mean there's not also.
But we shouldn't go all the way to order because the thing is, like, we need
crystal.
some variance to explore. Yes. There's potential upside too. There's grid cells. Let's say,
sure.
If you're thinking of grid world model, like you might have that infinite negative cell, but there's might be very large positive there. And if we kill variance and we're certainly going through this valley, maybe we missed out on a lot of upside. And that delta between that future where we introduce variance and the one where we didn't can be massive as well, right? And so it's very hard to predict what sort of technologies we won't be inventing if we slow down AI and how much positive impact we could have had. Anyways, it's a very difficult problem to model the future. That's
I basically think, I think you would agree with this. If we had really good institutions, like that were really competent and really coherent and like acted with conviction and scientific grounding on like everything they do and were like not corruptible and had like good checks and balances and strong, democratic participation across the board, I bet you would agree that in this situation, we would be better at handling risks and better at developing technology and better at avoiding downsides and better at reaping the benefits. We both have less downsides and we gain more benefits.
The problem is institutions have a coherence time, right? They get corrupted, they get subverted. Even this is what happens in companies, right? You have a startup, it's higher fitness, it's more competent, it's better put together, has better culture, outcompetes, gets huge, and then things calcify, the culture gets eroded away, and then it becomes unrecognizable, and it's kind of stuck there in the market leader position. And the same thing happens with sort of governments. And so, like, maintaining this dynamism of institutions, I think we're on the same page there. But right now, that's not the case. There's no
absolutely. I'm not saying we're there.
Yeah.
I'm saying we can do Pareto improvements. I'm not saying we can fix everything forever. I'm saying Pareto improvements are real and they are accessible, and we should take them.
Cool. Let's do the last question. So I'm going to join these questions together. So it's from Nick Eat the Path and also from Roms. Now, Nick Eat the Path says, if you have this exponential progress, you might unavoidably widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And then Roms asked a slightly different question, but it's a variation of the same thing. And I know none of you are associated with effective altruism that I'm aware of, but Timnit Gebru uses this terminology, the Tesca Real Bundle, and she says that effective altruists are eugenicists, and I think this is a slur. I completely disagree with this, but I think the point they're arguing, if you dig into it, is something along the lines of it's as if they're eugenicists because it somehow widens the gap between various different, not just the economic gap, but racial gaps and so on. So they're making an argument that it's immoral because it, has these deleterious effects on society. So what are your responses to that? Maybe you first, Beff.
Yeah, I think like people hate eugenics because it's like the hubris of top-down control, saying like, oh yeah, well, I know this gene has this phenotype, let me just like manually clamp it. And that's the point. Like, genetics and evolution has its way. It's a balance between like selection, but also suggestion, entropy of suggestion, and messing with it can yield really bad results. And so that's why it gets a bad rap. And I think for EAC, it's like we're actually against sort of top-down control and picking winners manually. We want to let sort of competition sort of select memes, cultures, companies, everything at all scales. There's a selection process. I mean, there are power laws for everything, and that's just the nature of complex systems that are adaptive and healthy. And I don't think if every one of your cells and every one of your cells had like equal amounts of free energy, like you wouldn't have a functional body, right? And that's not how complex systems work. And so,
Sure.
I think, yeah.
Could I just interject for a second? I understand everything you're saying, but in a way, this is related to what Connor was pushing you on earlier, which is to say that if you just let the chips fall and you let the free energy get minimized and all the rest of it, there will be some folks who are disadvantaged. And then this is a case of, well, do you regulate? Do you do something to bring them up?
Yeah. So I think like that's the thing, right? EAC wants equal access to opportunity, equal access or equal opportunity to accelerate, contribute to the acceleration, and be sort of promoted to higher levels in the hierarchical control system. And I just think that, for example, right now, regulation that's supposed to help the people, like for example, like this AI executive order, if you ban open source now, you're removing this ability of like a hacker to just learn AI, mess around with open source models, and eventually get a job and have a high impact in the trajectory of AI. We want to make sure we have again equal access to opportunity for everyone to have the opportunity to disrupt the incumbents and have a sort of meritocratic competitive system. And we think that's the fair way to go forward. And sometimes legislation, especially when written by the current incumbents, provides friction terms against sort of disruption and potentially ascension in the hierarchies, right? And so we got to be mindful of that. That actually sometimes legislation and regulatory capture can cause more inequality, or overall, I think the system always equilibrates the power law, but who gets to be in different parts of the distribution tends to change over time, right? Corporations aren't eternal. They always compete with one another, and maintaining that dynamism is the priority, right? So it's a different sort of striving for equality. It's because it's just realistic. It's more realistic. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. So it's a similar argument to before, which is to say, try not to distort the dynamics and let's adapt as quickly as possible, and that should be a moral good.
Yeah, I mean, the Silicon Valley dream, for example, is like you can come from anywhere, and if you have the right idea, you come here. The techno capital machine gives you an opportunity to try it out. You test it, and if it works, then you're set, and you can support your family, support people around you, and that's beautiful, and that's the sort of dynamism we want to support. I mean, I came here from Canada, I don't know, 2 years ago. I was, in grad school again and not doing that well. And now doing much better and get to test out ideas that I think are going to be net positive. And so I think like equal access to information, knowledge, and I think AI and compute is going to be important for social mobility. And we want to maintain that even if it comes at certain risks.
Okay. And just final question before we go, Beff. It's been an honor to have you on, by the way. How was it chatting with Lex?
Yeah, Lex is very good at making his guests comfortable. And it was like a similar sort of 4-hour marathon session. But yeah, hopefully get to chat with him again, maybe in a few years once we launch some of our technology. I think he'll want to chat again. That's my hope. But likewise, Connor, happy to chat again in the probably near future. I'm sure there's going to be other opportunities for podcasts, and we'll see how both our organizations evolved and our communities as well. Should be interesting future ahead for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we live in interesting times, don't we?
That's
And
for
if
sure.
you're ever in London, hit me up for those beers.
Yeah, let's do it. Awesome.